Welcome back to Booktalks Podcast. This is Marisa. I am solo going this one alone because today I will be interviewing Karin Slaughter. Karin Slaughter, the queen of crime herself. Her new book, This Is Why We Lied, the 12th book in the Will Trent series, comes out in the US on August 20th. We are about to jump in with Karin. And guys, this is a dream come true. So without further ado, Booktalks Podcast, This Is Why We Lied, the one and only Karin Slaughter. And can I call you Karin?
Sure.
Okay. Or would you prefer Queen of Crime?
Khaleesi? No.
This is Booktalks Podcast, so thank you for being here. I'll just start off with a brief introduction about you, and then we can jump right into This Is Why We Lied. But you are the author of more than 20 instant New York Times best-selling novels. You're published in 120 countries, and you've sold more than 40 million copies. You are the one and only Queen of Crime, Karin Slaughter, Instagram phenomenon. Your books, to me, are some of the best written, characters are the best developed, plots are the most thought out. So I am just a big fan and can't thank you enough for joining me today.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, so This Is Why We Lied. It will release in the US on August 20th. It is the 12th book in the Will Trent series. What do you want people to know about it? And what's the status of Will and Sarah in this book?
Well, I think primarily I want them to know it's just a really fun, gripping read. So if you like that sort of thing with lots of twists and turns, this is the book for you. Mm-hmm. You don't have to have read any of the Will Trents to jump right in. It's written so, you have all the information you need. But it finds Will and Sarah on their honeymoon, right? So they've been married. I'm not going to, give you guys a wedding ceremony. I'm not a wedding ceremony type. Suffice it to say, much fun was had by all. Mm-hmm. But, Will is just floating because he's like so happy and, he's had a lot of misery in his life and he's married this beautiful, smart woman he loves. And that was some of the hardest writing I've ever done because it's really difficult to write about people who are happy. And so I was like, man, I got to have a murder. Right, to make this balance this happiness out. And so, right off the bat, it's a light spoiler, but a woman is murdered named Mercy McAlpine. And then after that, we turn back the clock and we start with when Sarah and Will first arrive at the McAlpine Lodge in North Georgia in the mountains. And they're blissfully unaware of what the next few hours are going to bring.
Yes. You mentioned twists and turns, and I've got to say, I got to the end, thought I knew the killer. Turned the page, thought, oh, okay, it's not that person, it's this person. Turn the page. I was like, oh my gosh, she keeps switching it up on me. And what's crazy is the very first person I wrote down, won't say who, did end up being the killer. But you had thrown me so off, I don't know how you do it. I should just trust my gut. but no, you threw me so off. I mean, it was so twisty. Every page was just a new potential lead for Will and Sarah. And I think you captured their romance pretty well. As someone who started with the Grant County series, I have not always been sold on Will and Sarah, right? I've come from a place of her first husband. And so, the Will and Sarah story has been kind of hard for me to swallow. But this one, I feel like really kind of sealed the deal for me. Like they're in love. They have their own ways of communicating. So I think, maybe you have a new branch there to branch out on in romance writing.
Well, as long as there's a horrific murder, I'm okay with it.
Right.
It was fun because, with Sarah, she's been in a marriage before. She's been a bad marriage. She's been in a good marriage. And so she's like, I want to make this a good marriage. And she's very conscious of the choices you can make early on that can really haunt you throughout a marriage. And she's never getting married again. So she's like, we got to make this work. And Will's the same way. And he's doing the same calculations. There's this moment where he's really mad at Sarah. He's like, you need to not do this. And she's like, you're right. I probably shouldn't do this. And he's shocked, right?
Yeah.
because he's not used to having someone who's so logically consistent. And, it's interesting to me that they're making these choices, because I think a lot of people do that, in maybe not on their honeymoons, because there's not a murder, right? So they just get to have lots of sex and eat and drink and all this. But, I think for them that they really are consciously making these choices and saying, I want this relationship to work, and I'm not going to change this person. So I need to change how I respond to them, right? Because that's the only thing you can really control.
Yeah. And that kind of leads into another question that I had kind of thought about. You started writing Will Trent maybe even more than 18 years ago. It was published in 2006. I don't know how long, or, the first Will Trent book, Triptych. I don't know how long you'd kind of been brainstorming him, but did you kind of always know Sarah would be a part of his life? Was this always the plan, or did they each kind of have to change in their own ways to come together and really make this relationship work?
First was 2006, 18 years ago. What the hell?
Yeah.
My organs just turned to liquid.
Yeah.
Yes. So I did know. When I was writing Grant County, in the fourth Grant County novel, I thought it's going to become unbelievable at a certain point that so many people are being murdered in this small town and no one's leaving. Right? I didn't want to be the Jessica Fletcher of Grant County. And so I knew at book 4 that it was going to end, how it was going to end, and that I wanted to keep writing about Sarah. Because I love that character. And also, my career was kind of staked early on in very realistic crime. And I take an unflinching view at violence, and particularly violence against women, because I don't want to fade to black. I don't want anyone to think, oh, it's real secretly, it's titillating, or and it's not. It's a horrific assault. It's a taking of a life, because the person you are before is not the person you are afterward. And that's true with any act of violence against anyone. And so I thought I need to show how people are affected by this kind of loss. And so I started planning it out in subsequent books. And in between the 5th book and the 6th book, I wrote Will Trent, and that was Triptych. And so I knew that Will Trent would have this book Triptych. I knew he would have another book, Fractured, and that eventually Sarah would join his life. And so that was a set out plan for me. And I'm looking back, it's like, wow, how stupid were you that you thought this would work out, right? I mean, it just takes, well, why don't I just kill off a major character everybody in the world loves, right? Yeah. What an idiot. What an idiot. But I like how it turned out. I think it's kept me fresh as a writer. It's made me more interested in telling stories. And, as a career choice, I wouldn't recommend it, but it worked out for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And you kind of, transitioning to Will, get a bigger city. Atlanta's a little bit bigger of a city to play around with.
More people to kill.
Yeah, more people to kill. And then in this case, we get kind of just a completely fresh setting, which I felt like this was so different than anything you've done before, right? This closed door mystery. We're kind of all trapped on this mountain. The killer is probably up here with us. We've got to watch our back while we solve this case. And so the setting, as you were coming up with it, how important was it to the story, and kind of why did you decide to maybe do something a little different than the typical, cops running down Atlanta chasing the bad guy thing?
Well, I mean, all of that is what went into the decision, because I thought it would be fun, and these, a lot of people are interested in these eco lodges, and I went to one as research in Wyoming. And, I came away thinking, wow, I'm such an outdoors person. I never knew that about myself. And it was like, wow, no, you are not, because someone put the boat in the water. Someone told you where to drop your fishing line. Someone brought you a sandwich that they made, right? You were not an outdoors person. You were a very lucky person who had this fantastic vacation. And in a lot of ways, I had the vacation Sarah and Will didn't have. And I think they would have loved it, except for this murder. So it was really, I grew up reading Agatha Christie. I love Agatha Christie. And I also loved Encyclopedia Brown, Flowers in the Attic, really claustrophobic settings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that setting is so important to a story because if you have a sense of place, if you're anchored in something familiar, if something bad happens, it's even that much more horrific, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I've never written a locked room mystery. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's a lodge that they're at, but it's very isolated. Right off the bat, Mercy McAlpine is murdered. You're meeting guests, you're meeting the family that owns the lodge, you're meeting people who work there through Will and Sarah, right? So as a reader, these are all the suspects.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really fun way to write a book because honestly, it's that whodunit and tricking people and making them really certain it's this person. And then, no, wait, it's this person. And that's a lot of fun, but it's very difficult structurally to pull that off.
Mm-hmm.
And I reread a lot of Agatha Christie, particularly, and then There Were None, just to kind of see how she did it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the one thing, we talk about tropes in writing, particularly in crime writing. She is the trope source.
Mm-hmm.
And so the phones go out, the bridge is out, the storm knocks out the power, all that stuff.
Uh-huh.
We have modern conveniences now, right? Okay, well, yeah, the bridge did wash out, but people can still get up there on ATVs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or UTVs, or the phone's out. Well, we have satellite phones and radios. And so it was fun saying, oh no, this trope happened. Well, actually, we live in a society now. So, we have working phones and internet and things like that. So that was a lot of fun figuring out how to use those things to my advantage and to bring Sarah's medical experience to play. That was a lot of fun. And just having them figure out how to work together now that it's official. It's weird because a lot of people change once they get married, right? They stop, it for some reason becomes so much more real to them. And I think for Sarah, she definitely feels like this is a change in our relationship because we have this legal document now. And for Will, whose first marriage was a double dog dare, right? It's not the same for him, but he kind of figures it out really quickly and that this is important to Sarah, so it's important to him.
Mm-hmm. So are Will and Sarah ever going to get to ride off into the sunset and not have any more crimes, or is this their life now?
Would you want them to? Because that would be the end, right?
Well, that's my thought is if they did ride off into the sunset, I would want a Faith spinoff.
Oh, yeah.
Faith is just like, she's just so down to earth. She is so real. She's so funny to me because, I love Sarah, don't get me wrong, but she's so perfect. She's just everything about her is perfect. And Faith is just so raw and like human and, makes mistakes and all this stuff. So, if they ever rode off into the sunset, I think you could do something with Faith's character there.
Yeah, she's getting a little too good right now though, right?
Yeah.
Because she's got this guy she's interested in and her son is finally moving on and her daughter is transitioning from being like a freaking terrorist into a manageable age, right?
Right.
And so it's like, well, how's Faith going to ruin this is the next question. But the next Will Trent. So sometimes I focus on Amanda or Sarah or Will, and the next one Faith is going to get. So I think you're going to like that story.
Okay, just don't do her too dirty.
Don't worry. Well, she's down to clown. She can do whatever dirty thing. She's ready for it.
Going back to Mercy McAlpine, one of my favorite characters you ever wrote, and this may be a little controversial, is Lena Adams. I loved Lena because she was so gray. She was this nuanced, like there were times where you're rooting for her and there are times where you just hate her. And she's just one of those characters. And I feel like Mercy is kind of similar, right? She makes bad choices in her life that, cause bad things. But at the end of the day, she is a victim of a terrible crime. And, you really pull on the reader, because there are moments where I'm screaming at the pages, right? When we're flashing back to Mercy's life, where I'm like, just get out of there. Just get out of there. This isn't worth it. And then you're rooting for her to get justice. And so, what goes into developing a character like that who's so gray? I mean, I think you've said before, you don't really base them on real people, but how do you kind of come up with who they are and make them this complete flawed human, and still make us, root for them, want to get justice for them, but also feel frustrated by them at times?
Well, I mean, all of that's very by design on my part. And with Lena, it's funny because we've talked about how long it's been since I've written those novels, but, and that part's not funny. But with Lena, one thing I kept having to do over and over again in those early Grant County novels was explain to people it's okay if you don't like her. Because the concept of writing a woman that you don't like an anti-hero, people were like, oh, she made a mistake.
Right.
And it's like, no, I actually meant to do this, right? And then they were like, well, she writes him like a man. No, women make mistakes too, right? And with Mercy, I thought of that pull line from Lena and from Angie, to be honest, of a woman who is a victim, but she does make these really horrible decisions for herself, and she has a temper, and she doesn't know how to cope, and she's used to running back to safety. I mean, that's the thing that Mercy talks about, is that she's never felt safe. And that's something that Sarah has, like her family, her trust in Will. She feels 100% safe with them, or as safe as she can be considering what's happened to her. But I really wanted to show that, because I think we make a lot of value judgments on women in those situations that are incredibly unfair. Because we don't know that experience. And if I said to you, okay, go now, don't take any underwear, don't take the keys, you got to leave your car, you got to leave your pets, you got to leave your children, just walk out the door and figure it out. I mean, what would you do? Right?
Yeah.
And in some ways, the devil is better than the devil you don't. Well, add to that scenario, walk out, but then someone's going to hunt you, right? So would you really leave?
Right. Yeah.
Right. And if you don't have access to money and you can't go online without someone knowing about it, and you have no friends, your family's not supportive of you. So that's what I was doing with Mercy. And it comes from having this in my own family, because my grandmother was abused by my grandfather. He was horrifically violent with her. And we never talked about it. Everybody knew about it. We never talked about it. My uncles even teased her about being clumsy, right? And as I got older and I figured it out, I said to my sister, what the hell? We're never talking about this. And she said, we just don't. It's a private matter. And so that really taught me very early on that silence only protects abusers, right? And you look at somebody like Harvey Weinstein, or Bill Cosby, or R. Kelly, or whatever, especially if they have money, they're so much more insulated. But it's the silence that protects them. And I'm not talking about even the victims, the people around them who know this is going on, who write the checks, who hire the lawyers, who sue, all these things. They know it's going on. And they don't talk about it. And so with Mercy, I wanted to talk about it and show you this is actually what her life is like. And if you think that she could leave this and get away, then maybe you need to think again.
Yeah, because it's very easy to judge from our nice homes with, our families that support us. But I've seen that in your work. Just, you don't just present a victim who was so perfect and oh, it's so sad that they got murdered. It's like, no, this was a real human with a backstory, and things changed after this happened. So I've just always appreciated that about your work. Kind of on the flip side of that, I guess, Sarah Linton, right? Like, we have these characters who you kind of say, well, statistically, Mercy's someone who statistically, I mean, that makes sense, right? It's easy to say that, again, from the comfort of our homes. It's easy to judge. But you gave Sarah a backstory that maybe doesn't fit with our cultural perception of crimes against women. She came from a loving home. She did med school. Like, she did all the right things. And yet you gave her her own story of, this violent attack on her and how it shaped her life. And so, I'm assuming you did that on purpose, right? Like, I'm assuming it was by design. And so I guess, what is that statement you're making, and what do you want readers to really take away from Sarah's story?
Well, primarily, I mean, something women know already because we live with it. It can happen to anybody, right? And there's a line that I give Faith in This Is Why We Lied, that where she says, whatever you did is the right thing to do, right? And I think that as women, we need to tell that to each other more, because women can be so awful to each other when something bad happens. And I think part of it is a talisman, like, that would never happen to me.
Yeah.
I would yell, I would run, I would fight back. Well, I hope you never find out what you would do, right? Because that's awful. And we've all kind of disappointed ourselves sometimes in very low level situations. It's like, why do you think you would turn into a ninja, right? If this happened. And so with Sarah, yeah, I mean, I wrote about what she experienced in when she was an intern at Grady Hospital in the first book. I used that I mean, I don't want to say use it like, because it wasn't a device or anything, but the way Jeffrey responded to it was kind of the worst way a guy could respond to it. And, you contrast that with how Will responds to it. I think that presents an evolution sort of in perception. And also, it was really important to me, as someone who grew up reading crime novels and loved crime novels, and through the 90s read a ton of crime novels written by men, where something bad happened to a woman, she was either catatonic or she was wearing leather and smoking cigarettes, right? And the way she was healed was she had really great sex with the hero of the book, right? And that was like, you know what? I've manned the rape crisis hotline in college. I've known women who've been sexually assaulted. I'm not one of them ever thought, well, if I could only have sex with a really good guy, that would change everything, And so I wanted to bring a woman's perspective to it. And with Sarah, there is a typical victim, right, that we think of. And there's a great Jodie Foster movie called The Accused, right? Where she's not the typical victim. Well, they both are. They both are the typical victim, because it doesn't matter how much money, education, if you live in a trailer, if you live in a mansion, it can happen to you. And it can be a partner, it could be a family friend, it could be a family member, it could be your husband, it could be anybody, right? Because you don't know until you find out. And so with Sarah, I wanted that contrast as I was writing the series between her and Lena, because Sarah's assault was very cut and dry, and we learn a lot more about it in a book called After That Night, where Sarah talks about the fact that she was quote unquote lucky, because it was really straightforward. She didn't want this, right? Because of the nature of the attack against her, and that she was hurt so badly. And the cop believed her. And the cop worked to solve the crime, and they found the guy, and he was punished. All of those things have to align in order for that last thing to happen, for the man to be punished. Because we know judges will say, well, I don't want to ruin this young man's life, right? But I don't care about the woman's life. I care about this young man's life. And so that was something that I really brought to the series and was really conscious of, was these value judgments. And I will say, in my belief, it's gotten better, but it would be really hard for it to get worse. So, it's like a really low bar.
No, very low bar. And yeah, like you said, when it's a cut and dry thing and we can clearly see it's wrong. Oh, okay. Well, that's a little easier for us to work through. When it's one of those gray areas, oh, well, was she drinking? Was he? And then it's like, okay, but when I get drunk, I don't go out and attack someone. So it's just frustrating, right? As a woman, to read about or watch the documentaries where the cop didn't believe her and whatever. It's
Or
So I
she got
appreciate you
arrested
doing
for lying to a police officer, which is something that happens,
that.
right?
Yeah.
So it's very, I mean, you don't hear about somebody getting murdered and you're like, well, what was he wearing?
Right.
Why was he driving in that neighborhood? There's a lot of pity that we give victims, but with women, we're more likely to say, okay, well, let me know more about her. And she was white, she was pregnant, if she died, that's like the trifecta.
Yep.
Because we have so many women of color, so many Native women, like disproportionately a number of Native women who have just disappeared. And we don't talk about it. So I think that part of my job as a crime writer is to talk about these things.
And I think you did a really good job in this one with, you do a good job in all of them, but kind of contrasting Will to the local sheriff who already knew Mercy. He knew her background. She was a wild child. She did drugs. Like, this isn't surprising. And Will is like, it doesn't matter what she did or didn't do. A violent crime was committed against her. And so I guess thinking of Will's background, kind of where he came from, what he's been through, knowing what we know about his mother, how much of that background kind of played into this investigation and helps him, with all the investigations, but this one specifically kind of helped him fight for the victim and also maybe steered him in the wrong directions at times.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, Will grew up in foster care. He was a motherless child, a motherless son. It makes him, I think, in a lot of ways, more drawn to these sorts of cases and more sympathetic or empathetic when something like this happens to someone, particularly if they're a mother. I mean, he feels such a strong connection to John for losing his mother around the same age that Will became aware of himself as a motherless child, right? Because I think when you're a teenager, I mean, certainly when you're a young kid, you feel that, but as a teenager, as your brain starts to develop and you're aware of more of the world around you and you meet more people who have a more typical kind of life, you suddenly become aware in a very real way of the things that you didn't have, right? And so he's meeting a guy named Dave who was in that same situation as him. And he's looking at Dave and saying, you are a drug addict and a criminal and a horrible human being. And we had the same experiences basically in the children's home. And so why am I here on the happiest day of my life and you are here and you are such a miserable turd, right? So how did that happen? And a lot of the book is Will figuring that out and thinking, wow, okay, well, I had this person in my life. I had that person. And Dave only had toxic people, right? Who always wanted something for him. Everything was transactional for him. And not just with money, right? There was always, you got this, so I got that. And Will doesn't look at things that way. Will's actually kind of surprised if he gets something out of it, right? So, and I think that there's a great saying, life makes you pay for your personality. And Dave is who he is because that's who he wants to be. Amanda says this in the end, like he's addicted to his brokenness.
Right.
And Will is not a person who thinks that way.
Yeah. Will's been a very interesting character because he did come from such a broken background and he is so different from what he could have been. If one thing in his life had gone this way or this way, if Amanda hadn't been watching out for him, where would he have ended up? He kind of mentions it in this book that, he was Dave at one point. He did wind up in jail at one point and he was on the side of the road at one point. And it really was that he had people in his life who could support him. And so that kind of brings us to Amanda. She is such an interesting character. Reading Criminal and getting more background on her was eye-opening, and it really kind of made me like her a lot more because she can be so polar, right? She can be I'm someone who looks out for Will, but I'm Will's boss. And Will, you need to do this, you know?
Right, right.
Open forum here. Kind of, how do you want to comment on Amanda's relationship with Will? And, you know, either in the context of how it shaped Will or in the context of just who she is and who Will are and how they come together as people.
Well, Amanda is one of my favorite characters to write, and I keep a running list of things for her to say to Will that's just like really breaking his balls constantly. Because I just love that. And my favorite line about him, it comes from him about her, that it was like being if a dingo was your mother, right? And so they do have this very strange relationship, but Will has a lot of strange relationships in his life, right? He was married to Angie. They kind of grew up together. And so they could have this sister-brother thing, but they were also having sex. And, you know, they have this really bad attachment to each other that he eventually, you know, breaks, right? But he does that only because he sees this isn't how I have to live. But Amanda has always guided him to those things, right? I mean, she's the one who kept putting Will in Sarah's way. She's the one who, you know, brought Sarah in onto the GBI. I love her interactions with Sarah, because Sarah's like, I'm not scared of you, right? And Amanda's like, what? How am I going to deal with you if you're not scared of me? That's crazy. And you know, both Will and Faith are terrified. There was a funny moment in I thought it was funny, and after that night where Faith thinks it says a lot that the two people who lied to Amanda, because all three of them were in a situation, but the two people who lied were the ones who had sworn to uphold the Constitution. And Sarah was like, I'm just taking a few days off and I don't have to tell you because you're my boss, right? None of your business what I'm doing. And you were like, I'm working, I promise. And that, I mean, that really sums it up very well. And, you know, Sarah has this grudging, okay, well, you're sort of my mother-in-law. You know, so I'm going to treat you with a little bit of respect, more respect than I normally would. But Will is, you know, I think that he really does love her, right? But there's a part of him that is scared of her. But there's also an even larger part that knows no matter what, she'll always be there. And that sense of safety, and that's a theme in the book, right? It's like Mercy never feels safe. There's no safe space for her. You know, her family is awful. Her Dave is awful. Her son, I mean, is not there to protect her. She's there to protect him. So no one looks out for her. And even the guy, you know, who would be the closest to her, I don't want to give a spoiler away, but he's like, yeah, we just have sex, you know? It's not that, So it's like, nobody's really looking at, and even like she had a friend once and Dave couldn't stand that. So he ruined that. But Will has these really deep, meaningful connections. And, you know, Will feels safe. Sarah does. Mercy has never felt safe in her life. And that to me is the saddest part about her story.
Yeah. So just bringing it all back to Mercy, where can we get this story? It comes out August 20th. And what do you want readers to take away from Mercy?
You can get it anywhere. At least you better be able to. And also Audible, all digitals, everything, wherever you get books. What I want people to primarily take away is just like, wow, that was a fun read. You kept me guessing. I couldn't believe the end. I was, you know, I thought I was right. I was wrong. That back and forth, that's my sweet spot. I love that. So anybody who's saying that, I think that's a win for me, and it means I've done my job.
Well, from personal experience, you did your job, because like I said, I was all over the place. At the end of every chapter, I took notes on who I thought it was and why. And like I said, that first chapter, I had it and literally never once again revisited that person. Never once again revisited, because you just, every different direction, and you convinced me it's this person and then it's this. And then, so, I mean, if that's what you were going for, you nailed it.
Great. I love it. Thank you.
Well, I do not want to keep you. I'm sure you have lots of promotional things to do. So thank you so much for joining me and letting me pick your brain. I have been recommending this to everyone. So everyone I know is getting this on August 20th. My mom actually, another copy was sent to my house. So she's getting a sneak peek a little early. I told her she's not allowed to talk about it though, but she's very excited.
Great. Great. Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, and best of luck as it enters the world. I hope everyone loves it as much as I did.
Me too. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. We'll see you next time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode of Booktalks Podcast. This was so special to me because I am such a big Karin Slaughter fan, and I just, wow, we got some great answers. She's amazing. I love how she writes about women and kind of brings their stories to light. So thank you all so much for listening to Booktalks Podcast. You can follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Booktalks Podcast. You can also check out our YouTube channel. If you're listening to the audio only, then we are on Spotify and Apple. If you are watching us on YouTube, we have a YouTube channel. So thank you so much, and we'll see you guys back here next time. Bye-bye. Okay, guys, I just interviewed a Karin Slaughter. I didn't know how to turn them off. I didn't know how to turn these off. I don't know why they're on. I don't know if there's any other makeup on my face.